Golden Tales.
The wind cut through the city streets like shards of broken glass, rattling the rusted fire escapes and carrying with it the scent of snow, smoke, and forgotten dreams. It was one of those bitter January evenings when even time itself seemed to freeze. The city moved quickly. Boots thudded on pavement, horns blared, neon signs flickered like tired eyes. Everyone was rushing to somewhere warm, to someone waiting, to something that made them feel like life still had meaning. Except for one man. On the corner of 6th Avenue in Madison, beneath a dim and sputtering streetlight, sat a figure nearly swallowed by the night. His coat, once fine wool, had been worn thin by years of cold and sorrow. His gloves were missing their fingertips, exposing knuckles red with frost. Before him stood a battered upright piano, its surface scarred by time, its legs uneven, and its keys yellowed, chipped, and three missing entirely, still capable of trembling under the weight of beauty. This man, a ghost to most, was Elliot Marlowe. Once, he had stood on polished stages, beneath chandeliers that sparkled like constellations, playing to crowds who held their breath at the way he touched the keys. He had known ovations, he had known roses thrown at his feet, he had known love, but the world had a way of forgetting even the brightest stars when they fell from the sky. Now, he played for no one and everyone. He played not for applause or coins, though a few fell into the rusted tin can by his feet. He played because it was the only language left to him, a language that had not betrayed him, a language where his hands still mattered. That night, as snow began to fall like silent confetti, he started a nocturne, one of Chopin's saddest. Each note shimmered in the cold, hanging in the air like the breath of a dying candle. His fingers moved with practiced pain, coaxing out memories from wood and wire. Passersby slowed, glanced, then kept walking. Except one. She stepped from a black car with tinted windows, her heels clicking softly on the pavement, a woman perhaps in her 60s, yet she moved with the kind of grace that age does not erase, only refines. Her coat was tailored and deep burgundy, her scarf cashmere, her presence both commanding and tragic. She did not move closer. She stood at a respectful distance, listening, as the music curled around her like smoke, and when the final note faded, she took a step forward. "That piece," she said, her voice low but steady, "was played at my husband's funeral." She looked at Elliot, her eyes distant, like someone peering through the fog of decades. "He was the only man who ever made me believe that magic was real. You brought him back to me, for 4 minutes." Elliot looked up, startled, not by her words, but by the ache in them. He had heard 1,000 strangers toss coins and compliments, but this was something else. This was someone whose pain matched his own. Before he could speak, she turned, but just as she reached the car, she paused. "I will come again tomorrow," she said. "Play something sadder." The door closed. The car vanished into the blur of traffic, and Elliot sat motionless, heart pounding in his chest. Not because of the cold, but because for the first time in years, someone had looked beyond the rags, beyond the rust, and seen the man who used to be. That night, he did not sleep. He sat beneath the broken streetlight, playing quietly to the ghosts in his mind. He played for the widow, for her dead husband, and for the boy he used to be, with dreams too big for his small apartment and hands that once made the world weep. He did not know her name, but he knew that grief when he heard it, and something told him that her pain, like his, had gone unanswered for too long. Tomorrow, she would return, and this time, he would be ready. The next evening came wrapped in gray clouds and a silence that felt unnatural, the kind of silence that seemed to hush the city's usual chaos. Snowflakes fell slower than yesterday, but heavier, like the sky itself had grown tired of holding back its sadness. And at the corner of 6th Avenue in Madison, beneath the flickering streetlight, Elliot Marlowe waited. He had not moved far from that spot in nearly 24 hours. Just enough to warm his hands in a diner for 10 minutes before being asked to leave. He had returned with a single thought in his mind. She was coming back. At 6:04 p.m., her black car slid silently to the curb. The door opened. She stepped out again, the burgundy coat, the cashmere scarf, the poise of a woman who once ruled rooms, now filled only with echoes. This time, she did not wait. She walked directly toward him. No smile, no greeting, just a quiet nod, and a word, "Play." Elliot's fingers hovered above the keys for a moment longer than usual. He knew exactly what to choose. It was not Chopin tonight, It was his own, a piece he had written years ago, for someone he had lost long before the streets had claimed him. The notes were soft, uncertain at first, like a man remembering how to speak after years of silence. Then they grew, and shifted, and opened wide, like a wound that had never fully healed. The widow stood still, eyes closed, arms at her sides. She did not move, even when a gust of cold wind swept her scarf loose. She was somewhere else, with someone else. When the music ended, Elliot dared to look up. Tears traced the edges of her face, but she wiped none away. "You wrote that," she said. It was not a question. He nodded. She looked down at the piano, at the broken keys, at the man behind them. "Come with me," she said. Elliot blinked. "I cannot," he answered quietly. "Why not?" "Because this is all I have left." He touched the piano gently, as if it were made of paper. The widow looked at him for a long time, then reached into her coat and pulled out a small envelope. She placed it beside the rusted tin can. "I will not take you from this corner, Elliot Marlowe. Not yet." She paused. "But I will be here, tomorrow, and the day after, until you are ready to leave it behind." Without waiting for a reply, she turned and walked back to her car. This time, she did not vanish quickly. She sat inside, engine off, watching him through the glass as he placed his hands on the keys again. And for the first time in years, Elliot played not just for ghosts, he played for the living, for someone who listened. Inside the envelope was a note and a key. The note read, "For the days when the cold becomes too much, the address is on the back. A room, a piano, and heat. No questions asked." That night, Elliot played longer than he ever had. The streetlight above him stayed on, steady and strong. The wind had quieted, and the city, for once, listened. The morning after the widow's visit arrived, cold and gray. But Elliot awoke with a strange warmth in his chest, feeling he had not known for many years. The tiny key she had left burned gently in his palm, a small beacon of hope amid the long nights of despair. He sat on the creaking wooden bench beside his battered piano, the chill of the city biting through his worn coat. But his mind was elsewhere, swirling with memories and possibilities. Who was this woman? Margaret. What did she see in him? The man who had become a shadow. The invitation in that small envelope was a lifeline, a promise of shelter, music, and maybe something more. Yet, fear gnawed at his heart. Could he dare to believe that the world still held kindness for a man who had lost everything? Hours later, as the sun struggled to break through the dense clouds, Elliot found himself standing before a modest door on a quiet street, the address written carefully on the back of the note. He hesitated, the key cold in his pocket, then took a deep breath and turned it in the lock. Inside was a small room warmed by a crackling fire, and in the corner, a grand piano, polished and gleaming under soft lamplight. The air smelled of old wood and fresh hope. Margaret was there, waiting with a gentle smile that reached her eyes. "Welcome," she said simply. They sat together in the silence that only music can fill, and Elliot placed his fingers on the keys. At first, his touch was hesitant, like waking from a long sleep. But then the melody poured forth rich, haunting, and filled with the sorrow and beauty of a life once lived. As he played, the walls seemed to breathe with him, holding every note, every sigh. Margaret listened with tears shining, not because of grief alone, but because here, in this small room, two broken souls had found a fragile connection. Days turned into weeks. Each evening, Elliot returned to the warm room and the waiting woman. The music grew stronger, his spirit brighter, and slowly, the city's noise fell away until only the sound of their shared silence remained. But healing is never simple. Shadows from the past lurked, close old friends who turned their backs, memories that stabbed like knives, and the haunting question: could a man like Elliot truly find redemption? One evening, Margaret brought a photograph from her late husband's study, a picture of Charles, smiling beside a piano, his hand resting gently on the keys. She handed it to Elliot with a whisper. He believed in second chances. So do I. Elliot stared at the image, feeling the weight of years and the promise of tomorrow. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future beyond the cold streets, beyond the music played to ghosts. And as the moonlight streamed through the window, their melodies intertwined, two lives, once shattered, now slowly weaving a new song of hope. The days grew colder as winter deepened, but the warmth inside that small room was undeniable. Elliot found himself reluctant to leave each night, reluctant to return to the unforgiving streets that gnawed at his bones and soul. The piano, once a forgotten relic, had become his sanctuary, a place where memories, sorrow, and hope mingled like notes in a delicate melody. Margaret, too, seemed transformed. The widow's sharp edges had softened, replaced by a gentleness born from shared pain and quiet understanding. She would often arrive with a warm smile and a pot of tea, the steam rising like a promise between them. Their conversations were slow, careful, words chosen not to hurt, but to heal. One evening, as snowflakes drifted lazily past the frosted windowpane, Margaret shared stories of Charles. She spoke of a man who loved music as deeply as Eliot, who could coax a sunset from the strings of his guitar and laughter from the hearts of strangers. Her voice trembled, but she spoke with fierce love, the kind that refuses to be silenced even by death. Eliot listened, absorbing every detail, as if Charles were a ghost sitting beside him. He wondered if the man had ever felt as lost as he did, or if their shared love of music could have brought them together long ago. In return, Eliot revealed fragments of his past, his triumphs and failures, the fire that had taken his home, and the loneliness that had filled the void. His words came haltingly at first, then with growing courage, like a pianist rediscovering a long-lost piece. Margaret reached out and placed a steady hand over his. "You are not alone anymore," she said softly. But even as the bond between them grew stronger, shadows from Eliot's past crept closer. One bitter night, a figure from the old days appeared, a fellow musician who once shared the stage with Eliot, now a reminder of everything he had lost. The man offered pity disguised as charity, and questioned Eliot's presence in the warm room. "You do not belong here," he sneered. "You are a ghost, a failure." Eliot's hands trembled, not on the keys but with rage and shame. For a moment, the weight of years threatened to crush the fragile hope he had built. But Margaret's steady gaze anchored him. "No," she said, voice unwavering. "He belongs exactly where he is." That night, Eliot played with a fury that scorched the cold, pouring every ounce of pain and defiance into the music, each note a battle cry, each chord a declaration of survival. The music reached beyond the walls, beyond the loneliness, into the hearts of those willing to listen. And in the quiet aftermath, as the last note faded, Eliot realized that healing was not a straight path but a winding one, paved with light and shadow, loss and love. He was ready to walk it. The winter deepened, but Eliot's spirit no longer mirrored the cold outside. With every visit to the warm room, and every melody that escaped his fingers, a piece of the broken man was slowly mending. Margaret's presence became a constant light, unwavering and patient. She did not rush him, nor did she demand explanations for the years lost. Instead, she offered understanding, a rare and precious gift. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered softly through frosted glass, Margaret brought something unexpected, an old, leather-bound notebook. She handed it to Eliot with a gentle smile. "It belonged to Charles," she said. "He wanted you to have it." Curiosity and hesitation warred in Eliot's chest as he opened the notebook. Inside were pages of music, sketches, unfinished compositions, and heartfelt notes. Some pieces were marked with dedication, others with quiet reflections on life, loss, and love. As Eliot traced the notes with trembling fingers, he realized this was more than just a gift. It was an invitation to create, to remember, and to heal. Days turned into nights as Eliot pored over the music, finding echoes of his own pain and hope within Charles's words. Slowly, he began to compose again, inspired by the past but reaching toward a future. Margaret watched with quiet pride as the man who once lost everything began to reclaim his voice. One evening she asked softly, "Would you play for others? Not just for me or the ghosts of this room, but for people who need to hear your music." Eliot paused. The thought of stepping back into the world was terrifying, but also exhilarating. I think I am ready," he replied. Together, they planned a small concert at a local community center, a humble place for humble beginnings. The night of the concert arrived with nerves and excitement woven tightly together. Eliot sat at the piano, fingers poised above the keys. The audience was small but attentive. People from the neighborhood, some familiar faces, and Margaret in the front row, her eyes shining with tears. As the first notes filled the room, Eliot's heart swelled. Each melody was a story of loss, love, pain, and the courage to begin anew. The applause was gentle but sincere. After the concert, A young woman approached him. "Your music saved me tonight," she whispered. "Thank you." Elliot smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt seen, heard, and valued, and in that moment, he knew the piano had not just been a lifeline, it was a bridge. A bridge between the past and the future. Between two souls finding light in the darkest of nights. The late afternoon sun cast long, golden shadows through the tall windows of Margaret's house. Elliot found himself standing once more within walls that spoke of a life so different from the cold streets he had known. The air was rich with the scent of old books, polished wood, and memories carefully preserved like fragile glass. Margaret led him slowly through the quiet corridors, each room telling a story of love, loss, and resilience. Paintings hung in elegant frames, their colors muted but alive, portraits of people long gone, landscapes from distant places, and most hauntingly, a piano much like the one Elliot played. They stopped in a cozy study where a fire crackled softly in the hearth. The room was filled with photographs, letters, and mementos, silent witnesses to a life intertwined with music and heartbreak. Margaret gestured to a small table where an open photo album lay. She pointed to a picture of a younger couple, radiant with joy and hope. "That is Charles and me," she said, her voice catching in the quiet room. "We were inseparable, bound by music and dreams." Elliot traced the edges of the photograph, feeling the warmth of their smiles, the weight of the years that had passed. He wondered what it was like to lose someone so deeply, to have that void echo in every corner of a grand house. Margaret's gaze met his. "When Charles fell ill, music was the only thing that kept us going. It was our language when words failed." She paused, then continued, "And when he was gone, the silence was unbearable." Elliot nodded slowly, understanding more than she realized. For the first time since they met, he opened his heart fully. He told her about his rise to fame, the grand concert halls, the applause that once fed his soul, about the fire that stole everything, his home, his manuscripts, his sense of self, about the nights spent wandering, invisible to a world that had forgotten him. Tears welled in Margaret's eyes as he spoke, but she did not turn away. Instead, she reached out and took his hand in hers, a gesture of solidarity and compassion. "You are more than your past, Elliot," she whispered. "And this music, your music, is proof of that." He sat at the grand piano in the study, fingers trembling as they found the keys. This time, he did not hesitate. He played a piece inspired by their shared pain and hope, a melody that spoke of loss but also of resilience, of endings and new beginnings. The notes filled the room like sunlight breaking through clouds, wrapping around them in a fragile embrace. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious to the quiet healing taking place within these walls. And for the first time in years, Elliot allowed himself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, the past could be laid to rest. Winter was slowly loosening its grip on the city. The days grew longer, and the harsh bite of the cold softened into a gentle chill. For Elliot Marlowe, these changes mirrored a transformation within, a thawing of the frozen parts of his heart and spirit. The small concert at the community center had been only the beginning. Invitations multiplied, each one a step back into the world he had once known and almost forgotten. Yet no matter how far he traveled or how many stages he graced, Elliot always returned to the quiet room in Margaret's house, the place where healing began, where music was more than sound, it was salvation. Margaret watched him with pride and quiet love, never pushing, always steady, a lighthouse in the storm of his doubts. One evening, as spring whispered its arrival through blooming branches and warming breezes, Margaret handed Elliot a letter. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the seal was unmistakable. "It is from a foundation," she explained softly. "They want to support your music, help you compose and perform on a larger scale. They have heard your story." Elliot held the letter carefully, as if it were made of fragile glass. He thought of the long nights alone, the cold streets, the broken piano, and he thought of the woman who had refused to give up on him. "I do not know if I deserve this," he admitted quietly. Margaret smiled. "You deserve every note of it, and every moment that follows." Days turned into weeks as Elliot embraced this new chapter. He composed music that spoke of redemption, of love found in unexpected places, of second chances carved from pain. His performances touched hearts far beyond the small city corners where he had once played for ghosts. Yet, amid the applause and bright lights, Elliot's greatest joy remained the quiet evenings with Margaret, sharing music, memories, and dreams. One night, After a particularly moving recital, they sat by the fireplace. The room glowed with warmth and contentment. Margaret reached for Elliot's hand. "Thank you for trusting me," she said, "for letting me in." Elliot squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you for seeing me, for hearing the music when I thought no one would." Outside, the world was alive with possibilities, a horizon painted in soft gold and promise. And as Elliot played a melody born of hope and healing, he knew that this was more than a new beginning. It was a dawn for a man who had lost everything, and yet found it all in the notes between the silence.